Hurricane Helene not only smashed Florida's Gulf Coast with Category 4 winds and storm surge, but also changed the landscape of Appalachia for good. 1 year later, we're looking back on this historic system with Josh Morgerman, who was there when it made landfall, and he joins us live now. Josh, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Dr. Jim. And just wow, can't believe that was a year ago.
Yeah, exactly. Time goes quickly, so fast. Now, tell us what you remember leading up to Helene's landfall, because there was a lot going on just as it was forming and then eventually making landfall.
Yeah, it's been this cluster. We've been deep in this sort of like this Gulf Coast phase with hurricanes, one big landfall after another. And I remember just thinking as it sort of grew fangs and became a category 4, just thinking like, wow, another one of these. It's just incredible as it approached. It's like you couldn't believe that we were having this happen again and in Florida again. Just crazy.
Well, and also the fact that as it was going along and we saw when landfall was going to happen, we started having the sinking feeling that landfall was not going to be the end of the story with Helene.
Exactly. And you pointed this out in your opener, and it really hits how I think about Helene is what a multi-chapter story it was. It was like a play with like, I feel like 3 acts. There was the landfall in Florida, then there were the inland winds, like it was like surprisingly destructive in Georgia and those places, and in sort of elevated terrain, they had crazy wind. And then there was the third and in some ways the biggest chapter, which was the flooding in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee. And it was just like, okay, wow. And that was quite a final act. There were so many kind of phases to this disaster as it unfolded, and that's one of the things. There have been other hurricanes in American history that have been that way. Camille was actually that way, devastated Mississippi, and then there was a big inland flood event in Virginia many days later. But Helene was, I think, almost the queen of these multi-chapter hurricane events.
Well, and of course, what was really different with the Helene compared to a lot of other storms is how far it went inland and held on to some of that power, and then, of course, the rainfall with it.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really surprised me was the wind damage far, far inland. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that it was elevated terrain. So that sort of enhanced the situation because as a hurricane starts to weaken over land, the winds at the surface might die, but at higher up, they could still be pretty strong. And if you've got hills and mountains, that are higher up, they're getting a taste of those higher level winds. And I think that's what happened and why you had some of that massive forest blowdown that was well inland, way, way, way beyond the landfall point.
Well, another part of Helene's landfall story is the storms that impacted the areas like the year before, or before example, Idalia the year before, and two other Florida Gulf Coast landfalls in 2024. I mean, it has been really active in that area.
Folks in the west coast of Florida, the Gulf Coast, from the kind of the Panhandle into the Big Bend down to Tampa Bay and below, obviously well below, down to like Fort Myers, are exhausted. And one interesting thing you find there is that there's almost like layers of damage. When I was there for Milton, I was in Sarasota for Milton, and a lot of the damage that I saw was actually Helene damage, like boats that were still on land from Helene, but I was seeing them after Milton. It was like you didn't know what damage was from which hurricane, and it reminded me a little bit of 2020 when Southwest Louisiana was devastated by Laura, and then Delta came into the same exact area. It's just folks get weary, but I want to just point out that climatologically, that's kind of normal. What you find is hurricanes pick a place and then they keep wailing on it like a pattern gets entrenched. And unfortunately, that Big Bend area of Florida is where it's been at.
Well, and of course, with Helene, I mean, the story just continued to unfold as the rainfall got to the mountains and then the flooding, and it was sporadically just areas of just complete devastation, which was a little bit different because sometimes a hurricane will hit by the next day we're cleaning up, but this wasn't the case with Helene.
Yeah, the damage in North Carolina, I'm not an expert on inland flooding events, but I have to say, man, even to me, as someone who doesn't kind of like follow that kind of event as closely, the destruction was jaw-dropping. And it wasn't just a matter of houses or buildings being damaged. It just looked like the infrastructure was not damaged, just removed, erased. I mean, roads, highways. I mean, literally, it was like just whole areas literally just obliterated down to the infrastructure. And I think that's what made this disaster unique. If you don't even have roads to get in there, how do you start to clean up? It was a little bit like the Mississippi coast after Katrina, where the damage was so profound. And unfortunately, I think that the path for recovery of these communities in North Carolina that were so heavily affected, this is going to be a multi-year or even multi-decade recovery, as it was in coastal Mississippi after Katrina. We're 20 years on for Katrina from Katrina, and coastal Mississippi is looking really good. But, it took a while to get here.
We have about 45 seconds left. How does Helene rank amongst the storms that you have hunted over the years?
Well, one interesting thing was that in terms of the Florida, the winds in the Florida impact were not quite as did not feel quite as strong as I would expect in a Category 4 hurricane. I don't know if it's because they weren't mixing to the ground or anything else, but I think it was almost like the story grew as it went inland, is how I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those storms, when we say Helene, it will bring back memories for decades to come in the future. Well, Josh, we appreciate your time in this look back at what was one of the worst storms of the year and of the decade for many reasons, but we appreciate your time, and hopefully we can see a little slower hurricane season in the days ahead. Thanks for being with us.